The silence of the dusty main street seemed to mock Zara Reed as she clenched her jaw against the whispers that followed her like vultures. 7 years of marriage, 7 years of pitying glances and hushed conversations that always stopped when she entered the general store. 7 years of emptiness where a child's laughter should have been. But today, riding beside Garrett Zimmer into Copper Creek, her head held high despite the tears threatening to spill, Zara knew everything was about to change. The year was 1876, and the unforgiving sun of the Arizona Territory beat down on Copper Creek with merciless intensity. At 30 years old, Zara had long since grown accustomed to the heat, but never to the stares. Her late husband Thomas had been dead for over a year now, taken by a sudden fever that swept through their small homestead. The whispers had only grown louder since then. "Barren women bring bad luck," they said. No wonder Thomas caught the fever. Zara adjusted her faded blue calico dress and straightened her back in the saddle of the chestnut mare. She refused to hunch her shoulders the way she used to. Beside her, Garrett rode tall on his black stallion, his presence alone enough to quiet some of the onlookers who had gathered on the wooden boardwalk. "You don't have to do this," Garrett said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "We could turn around right now." Zara shook her head, her eyes fixed on the sheriff's office at the end of the street. "I've run from their words long enough, Mr. Zimmer. It's time they heard mine." Garrett nodded, the brim of his hat casting shadows across his weathered face. At 35, he'd seen enough of the world to know that courage came in many forms, and the woman beside him had more of it than most men he'd encountered in his years of drifting. They had met just 3 weeks ago when Zara had found him half dead near her property, shot by cattle rustlers and left to die in the unforgiving desert. She had dragged him to her small cabin, cleaned his wounds, and nursed him back to health, despite knowing nothing about him except that he needed help. As they approached the sheriff's office, Zara felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She had come to town with purpose today. The bank had sent notice that they were foreclosing on her property, claiming Thomas had taken out loans she knew nothing about. Without a husband or children, the bank manager had made it clear that a woman had no business owning land. "Remember what we discussed," Garrett said as he dismounted and moved to help her down. His hands were strong at her waist, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to lean into his support. "I remember," she replied, smoothing down her dress and lifting her chin. "Thank you for coming with me." Sheriff Walter Mills looked up from his desk when they entered, his bushy eyebrows rising in surprise at the sight of Zara. "Mrs. Reed," he said, setting down his pen. "Don't often see you in town these days." "Sheriff," Zara nodded, "I've come about the notice from the bank." The sheriff's eyes flickered to Garrett, who stood silently behind her, his presence a steady comfort. "And who might this be?" Mills asked. "Garrett Zimmer," Garrett stepped forward, offering his hand. "I'm helping Mrs. Reed with some matters." The sheriff shook his hand, his gaze assessing. "Zimmer? Don't recall seeing you around these parts before." "Just passing through," Garrett replied. "Or I was, until I found reason to stay a while." Zara felt a warmth creep up her neck at his words, but quickly refocused on the matter at hand. "Sheriff, the bank claims Thomas borrowed money against our homestead, but I never signed any papers, and he never mentioned any loans to me. Mr. Preston at the bank refuses to even discuss it with me because I'm a woman alone." Sheriff Mills leaned back in his chair. "Well now, Mrs. Reed, banking matters aren't really the business of the law, and you know how things are. Without a husband or sons to work the land—" "The land is mine," Zara interrupted, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've worked it alongside Thomas for 7 years, and I've kept it running since he died. I can show you the deed with both our names on it." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Reed, no offense, but everyone knows—" "Knows what exactly?" Garrett cut in, his voice dangerously quiet. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Now, see here, stranger." "The sheriff means," Zara interrupted, "that everyone knows a barren woman is hardly worth the trouble." The words tasted bitter on her tongue, but she forced herself to continue. "That's what they all whisper, isn't it? That I couldn't give Thomas children, so I'm somehow less than a real woman, that I should just disappear to spare everyone the discomfort of my existence." A heavy silence filled the office. Sheriff Mills had the decency to look embarrassed. "Mrs. Reed, I never said—" You didn't have to, Garrett said. But I'm curious, Sheriff. Does the law in Copper Creek only protect certain types of people? Or does it protect property rights regardless of who holds the deed? The sheriff's face hardened. The law's the law, Mr. Zimmer, but there are ways things are done around here. Then perhaps it's time for things to change, Zara said. She placed the deed to her property on the desk. I want this recorded properly in the county records, and I want a formal investigation into the loans the bank claims my husband took out. If they can't produce papers with both our signatures, then I believe that constitutes fraud. The sheriff looked from the deed to Zara's determined face, then to Garrett's unwavering stare. I suppose I could have a word with Preston, he finally conceded. But I can't promise anything, Mrs. Reed. Thank you, Sheriff, Zara said, turning to leave. That's all I'm asking for now. Outside, the midday sun had drawn even more townspeople to the main street. Zara could feel their eyes following her as she and Garrett made their way toward the general store. She needed supplies, and facing Eliza Thornton, the shopkeeper's wife and the town's most prolific gossip, was the next hurdle. You handled that well, Garrett said as they walked. Not many would stand up to Mills like that. Zara gave him a small smile. I've had practice hiding my fear, though I must admit having you there made it easier. Garrett's eyes softened. You've been fighting alone too long, Zara. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She quickly looked away, unsure how to respond. As they approached the general store, the small group of women gathered on the porch fell silent. Zara recognized them, all women she'd once considered friends before her inability to conceive had somehow made her an outcast. Mrs. Reed, Eliza Thornton's voice carried across the porch, falsely sweet. What a surprise to see you in town, and with company. Zara nodded politely. Mrs. Thornton, ladies, I've come for supplies. And who might your escort be? Asked Virginia Bowman, eyeing Garrett with undisguised curiosity. Garrett tipped his hat. Garrett Zimmer, madam. Mr. Zimmer has been helping me with repairs around the homestead, Zara explained, conscious of how it must look to have a strange man accompanying her so soon after her husband's death. How fortunate for you, Eliza said, her eyes gleaming with fresh gossip. I'm sure a woman alone needs all sorts of help. The implication hung in the air, and Zara felt her cheeks burn with indignation. Before she could respond, Garrett stepped forward. Mrs. Reed was kind enough to save my life when I was shot by rustlers on her property, he said evenly. She's shown me more Christian charity than I've seen in many who claim to be God-fearing people. Now, if you'll excuse us, ladies, we have business to attend to. He placed his hand lightly at the small of Zara's back, guiding her past the now silent women and into the store. Once inside, Zara let out a shaky breath. Thank you, she whispered. They've always been cruel, but never so openly before. Garrett's jaw tightened. People fear what they don't understand, and they don't understand a woman strong enough to stand on her own. Mr. Thornton emerged from the back room, his expression guarded as he recognized Zara. Mrs. Reed, what can I help you with today? Zara handed him her list of supplies, flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition, and a few other necessities. As he gathered the items, Garrett wandered the store, examining the shelves with casual interest. That'll be $8.42, Mr. Thornton said when he'd assembled everything. Zara reached for her small purse, but Garrett was suddenly beside her, placing coins on the counter. I insist, he said quietly when she began to protest. Consider it payment toward my room and board. Mr. Thornton counted the money with a raised eyebrow. Staying out at the Reed place, are you? People might talk, you know. People already talk, Mr. Thornton, Zara replied. I stopped caring what they say a long time ago. It wasn't entirely true, but she was determined to make it so. As they loaded the supplies onto their horses, Zara noticed a crowd gathering outside the bank across the street. At the center stood Harold Preston, the bank manager, his face red with anger as he gestured wildly at Sheriff Mills. Looks like the sheriff works fast, Garrett observed. Or Mr. Preston works fast to cover his tracks, Zara murmured. They mounted their horses and were about to ride out of town when Preston spotted them. You! He shouted, pointing at Zara. This is your doing, isn't it? Sending the sheriff to question my business practices." The crowd turned to stare as Preston stormed toward them, followed by a reluctant-looking Sheriff Mills. "Mrs. Reed was within her rights to ask questions about her property," the sheriff said, though he looked uncomfortable being caught in the middle. "Thomas Reed knew exactly what he was doing when he took out those loans," Preston insisted. "Just because his wife was too busy failing to provide him with heirs doesn't mean she can question legal documents after his death." A collective gasp went up from the onlookers. Even in Copper Creek, such direct cruelty was rarely spoken aloud. Zara felt as though she'd been slapped. 7 years of whispers had never stung as much as hearing those words shouted in the middle of town. But, before she could respond, Garrett had dismounted and stood facing Preston, his hand hovering near the gun at his hip. "I suggest you apologize to the lady," he said, his voice dangerously soft. Preston puffed up his chest. "I don't know who you think you are, stranger, but this is bank business. Mrs. Reed's property will be auctioned off at the end of the month as planned." "Not if the loans were fraudulent," Sheriff Mills interjected, surprising everyone. He held up a stack of papers. "These supposed loan documents only have Thomas Reed's signature. The law requires both husband and wife to sign when property is held jointly." He turned to Zara. "You were right to question this, Mrs. Reed." A murmur ran through the crowd. Zara sat frozen in her saddle, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "This is outrageous," Preston spluttered. A woman has every right to her own property," came a new voice. Juliet Parker, the widow who ran the town's small hotel, pushed her way through the crowd. "I, for one, am tired of men like you, thinking you can take advantage of women who've lost their husbands." Several other women murmured in agreement, including, surprisingly, Eliza Thornton. Zara stared in disbelief as the tide of public opinion seemed to shift before her eyes. Preston looked around at the hostile faces, his confidence visibly faltering. "This isn't over," he muttered, before turning on his heel and storming back toward the bank. Sheriff Mills tipped his hat to Zara. "I'll be looking into this further, Mrs. Reed. In the meantime, your property remains yours." As the crowd dispersed, many with new gossip to share, Garrett remounted his horse and they began the ride back to Zara's homestead. They traveled in silence for several miles, the events of the day settling between them like dust after a storm. Finally, as they crested the hill that overlooked her small valley, Zara spoke. "Why did you help me today? You could have continued on your way once you were healed." Garrett was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon, where the setting sun painted the desert in hues of gold and crimson. "I've been drifting for 15 years, he finally said, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But sometimes you find a place that feels right." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "Or a person." Zara looked away, her heart suddenly racing. "Mr. Zimmer." "Garrett," he corrected gently. "After today, I think we're past formalities, don't you?" Zara nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Garrett, thank you. For everything." As they rode down into the valley toward the small cabin that had been Zara's prison of loneliness for so long, something felt different. The weight that had pressed on her chest for years seemed lighter somehow. For the first time since Thomas's death, perhaps even since before, that Zara Reed felt the stirring of hope. The routine they fell into over the next few weeks came naturally, as though they had been working side by side for years rather than days. Garrett proved himself skilled with both livestock and carpentry, repairing the sagging porch and strengthening the corral fences that Zara had struggled to maintain alone. In return, she cooked meals that made him close his eyes in appreciation and showed him the hidden springs on her property, where the water ran clear and cold even in summer. They spoke little of his past, though Zara gathered he had been a ranch hand, a soldier in the war, and occasionally something less reputable when times were hard. He never pressed her about Thomas or her years of marriage, seeming to understand that some wounds were still too raw to examine. But in the evenings, as they sat on the newly repaired porch watching the sunset paint the desert, their conversations deepened. Zara found herself sharing memories of her childhood in Missouri, of her parents who had died of cholera when she was 18, and of the stagecoach journey west that had brought her to Arizona territory. I met Thomas my first week in Copper Creek, she told Garrett one evening. He was kind, steady, offered me security when I had nothing. Garrett nodded, rolling a cigarette between his fingers. You loved him? The question caught her off guard with its directness. I respected him, was grateful to him. Maybe that's a kind of love. She stared into the gathering darkness. But I think real love should have more fire in it, don't you? Garrett lit his cigarette, the match briefly illuminating his face. His eyes met hers over the flame, and something electric passed between them before he shook the match out. Yes, he said simply. I think it should. 2 days later, Sheriff Mills rode out to the homestead with news. The bank's fraud had extended beyond Zara's case. Preston had been falsifying loans against several properties, particularly those owned by widows or elderly couples. He's been arrested, the sheriff explained, accepting the coffee Zara offered. The bank's being audited by folks from Tucson. Your property is safe, Mrs. Reed. Relief washed over Zara. Thank you for investigating, Sheriff. I know it couldn't have been easy going against a man like Preston. Mills looked uncomfortable. Truth is, Mrs. Reed, I should have done it sooner. There were rumors, but... He trailed off, then straightened his shoulders. Well, no matter now. Justice is being served. After the sheriff departed, Zara found Garrett in the barn, brushing down his stallion. She told him the news, unable to keep the smile from her face. You did it, Garrett said, pride evident in his voice. You stood up for yourself and won. We did it, she corrected. I couldn't have faced them alone. Garrett set the brush down and turned to her. Yes, you could have. You're stronger than you know, Zara Reed. They stood for a moment in the dimness of the barn, the air between them charged with unspoken words. Then Garrett cleared his throat and picked up the brush again. I've been thinking, he said casually. That north field of yours would be good for wheat if we cleared the rocks. Could increase your yield come harvest time. Zara's heart skipped at the word we, at the casual assumption of a future that included both of them, but uncertainty still plagued her. Garrett, she began hesitantly, you don't have to stay out of obligation. Your wounds are healed. You've more than repaid any debt you might have felt. He continued brushing the horse, his movements deliberate. Is that what you think, that I'm staying out of obligation? I don't know why you're staying, she admitted. You said yourself you've been drifting for 15 years. What's changed? Garrett finally turned to face her, his expression serious. Maybe I'm tired of drifting. Maybe I've found something worth stopping for. Zara's breath caught in her throat. And what happens when you decide to move on again? When the next town calls to you? That won't happen. How can you be so sure? Garrett set the brush down and took a step toward her. Because in 15 years of wandering, I've never once looked at a place and thought home until now. The word hung between them, laden with meaning. Zara wanted desperately to believe him, but fear held her back. The town will talk, she said weakly. A widow living with a man who isn't her husband. Let them talk, Garrett said, taking another step closer. Or we could give them something else to talk about. Zara looked up at him, confusion in her eyes. What do you mean? Marry me? The words were so unexpected that Zara took a step backward, her hand flying to her throat. What? Garrett's eyes never left hers. Marry me, Zara. Not because you need protection or because of what people might say. Marry me because I love you, because I think you might love me too. Zara's mind reeled. It had been less than 2 months since Garrett had stumbled into her life, wounded and half dead. How could he speak of love so soon? But even as the rational part of her mind protested, her heart recognized the truth, the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room. The comfort she felt in his presence, the sense of rightness when they worked side by side. I can't have children, she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. The doctors in Tucson confirmed it last year. If you're looking for a family, I'm looking for you, Garrett interrupted. Just you, children or no children. Tears filled Zara's eyes. How can you say that? Every man wants sons to carry on his name. Garrett stepped forward again, close enough now that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I've seen enough death in my life to know that legacy isn't about blood. It's about how you live, who you love. His voice softened. And I love you, Zara Reed. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek in his calloused hand. Zara leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly as emotions overwhelmed her. "I need time," she whispered. "This is all happening so fast." Garrett nodded, understanding in his eyes as he dropped his hand. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." That night, Zara lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling as moonlight filtered through the thin curtains. Thoughts of Garrett filled her mind, his strength, his kindness, the way his rare smiles transformed his face. She thought of Thomas, too, of their comfortable but passionless marriage, of his disappointment each month when her courses came, of the growing distance between them in those final years. What would it be like to be loved fully, without conditions, to be wanted for herself alone, not for what her body could or could not produce? The question followed her into dreams of desert flowers blooming after rain, of new life springing from barren ground. 3 days later, Zara rode into town alone. She had errands to run, but more importantly, she needed to make this journey by herself, to face the whispers and stares without Garrett beside her, to prove to herself that she could. Copper Creek seemed different somehow. Or perhaps it was Zara who had changed. She tied her horse outside the general store and straightened her shoulders before entering. Eliza Thornton was behind the counter, and her eyebrows rose at the sight of Zara. "Mrs. Reed," she greeted, her tone lacking its usual edge. "How are you faring?" "Well enough, thank you," Zara replied, handing over her list of supplies. As Eliza gathered the items, she cleared her throat. "I wanted to say, that is, some of us ladies have been talking about Preston and what he tried to do to you and others." Zara said nothing, waiting. "We were wrong," Eliza continued, not meeting Zara's eyes, "to treat you as we did, after Thomas passed, and before." The admission, halting as it was, took Zara by surprise. "Thank you for saying that, Mrs. Thornton." Eliza nodded, still not looking up. "The sewing circle meets on Thursdays at the church. You'd be welcome to join us, if you like." It was a small olive branch, but a significant one. Zara considered it for a moment. "Perhaps I will sometime." As she paid for her supplies and left the store, Zara noticed other changes in the town's atmosphere. People nodded to her as she passed. Mrs. Parker waved from the hotel porch. Even Sheriff Mills tipped his hat, with what seemed like genuine respect. It was as though proving Preston's fraud had somehow validated her in the town's eyes. Or perhaps standing up for herself had changed how she carried herself, and others responded in kind. Her last stop was at the small church on the edge of town. Pastor Michaels was sweeping the steps when she approached. "Mrs. Reed," he greeted warmly. "It's been some time since we've seen you at Sunday service." Zara nodded, acknowledging the gentle rebuke. "I've found it difficult to face the congregation, Pastor, after everything." The elderly man leaned on his broom, his kind eyes understanding. "The church should be a place of solace, not judgment. If you felt unwelcome, then we have failed in our Christian duty." "It wasn't just the church," Zara admitted. "I pulled away from everyone after Thomas died." "Maybe even before that." Pastor Michaels nodded. "Grief does that to us, isolates us when we most need connection." He studied her face. "But you seem different today, lighter somehow." Zara felt a small smile form. "I feel different. I came today to ask you something, Pastor." "Of course, my dear, anything." Zara took a deep breath. "If I were to marry again, would you perform the ceremony?" Pastor Michael's bushy eyebrows rose in surprise, then settled into a pleased expression. "It would be my honor. May I ask who the fortunate gentleman is?" "Garrett Zimmer," Zara replied, feeling a flutter in her stomach at saying it aloud. "He's been staying at my homestead while recovering from injuries." If the pastor had any concerns about propriety, he kept them to himself. "Mr. Zimmer must be a special man to have won your heart so quickly." "He is," Zara said simply. "He sees me as I am and values me anyway." "Not anyway, Mrs. Reed. Because of." Pastor Michaels smiled. "The right person loves us not in spite of our perceived flaws, but because of the strength it takes to carry them." The wisdom of his words settled around Zara like a comfortable blanket. "Thank you, Pastor." On the ride home, Zara's mind was clearer than it had been in years. the burden of shame she had carried for her barrenness, for the whispers, for surviving when Thomas hadn't seemed to lighten with each hoofbeat. As she crested the hill overlooking her valley, she saw Garrett working in the field below, his shirt dark with sweat as he cleared rocks from the north section. He had spoken of planting wheat there, of a future harvest, of plans that extended beyond the next sunrise, plans that included her. Zara urged her horse forward, her decision made. Garrett looked up at the sound of approaching hooves, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. A smile spread across his face as he recognized her, and Zara felt an answering warmth bloom in her chest. He set down his tools and walked to meet her as she dismounted. "How was town?" "Different," she replied. "Better, I think?" He nodded, studying her face. "And you? How are you?" Zara took a deep breath. "I spoke with Pastor Michaels." Garrett stilled, his eyes never leaving hers. "Did you now?" "Yes, about performing a wedding ceremony." Zara held his gaze steadily. "Our wedding ceremony. If you still want to marry me." The transformation of Garrett's face was something Zara knew she would remember until her dying day. Joy, pure and unguarded, erased the habitual caution from his features, making him look years younger. "Want to marry you?" he repeated, stepping closer. "Zara, I've never wanted anything more in my life." He reached for her then, one hand cupping her face while the other settled at her waist. "Are you certain?" In answer, Zara rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as Garrett pulled her closer, his arms encircling her completely. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zara felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years, perhaps ever. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I don't know how it happened so quickly, but I do." Garrett's forehead rested against hers. Sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind takes time to understand. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Copper Creek. To Zara's surprise, nearly the entire town attended. Women who had once whispered behind her back now offered congratulations. Men who had avoided her eyes now shook Garrett's hand with genuine goodwill. Eliza Thornton and the ladies of the sewing circle had even made a wedding quilt, presenting it to Zara with tearful apologies for years of unkindness. "New beginnings deserve new bedding," Eliza said with a wink that made Zara blush to her roots. As they rode back to the homestead that evening, now husband and wife, Zara looked at the man beside her and marveled at how life could change so completely in such a short time. "What are you thinking, Mrs. Zimmer?" Garrett asked, the new name sending a thrill through her. "That I'm happy," she replied simply. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again." Garrett reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "This is just the beginning." And it was. The months that followed were filled with hard work as they expanded the homestead, adding rooms to the cabin and improving the land. Garrett's skill with horses attracted buyers from as far away as Tucson, and soon they had a small but thriving business, breeding and training mounts for ranch work. Zara joined the sewing circle and gradually rebuilt friendships with the women of Copper Creek. She still felt the pang of emptiness sometimes when she saw mothers with their children, but the ache was gentler now, cushioned by Garrett's unwavering love. One evening, nearly a year after their wedding, Garrett returned from town with a strange expression on his face and asked Zara to sit down. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her heart racing with sudden fear. "No," he assured her, taking her hands in his. "But I met someone in town today, a woman named Sarah Winters. She came on the stage from California." Zara waited, puzzled by his intensity. "She has a child with her," Garrett continued. "A little girl, about 3 years old. Her name is Emma." "Garrett, what—" "Sarah is dying, Zara. Consumption. The doctor says she has a few months at most. She came here looking for a family to take her daughter when she's gone." Understanding dawned slowly. "You told her about us?" Garrett nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I told her I'd need to talk to my wife, that this would be your decision as much as mine." Zara's heart thundered in her chest. "You want us to raise her child?" "Only if you want to," Garrett said quickly. "I know it might stir up painful feelings for you. I know it wouldn't be the same as having a child of our own. But Zara," his voice softened, I saw this little girl with her big brown eyes and her mother's desperation, and I thought of you, of your heart, of how much love you have to give. Tears filled Zara's eyes as emotions warred within her. Hope, fear, longing. What if I'm not a good mother? What if I don't know how? Garrett squeezed her hands. You'll learn. We both will. And the town? What will they say? A smile tugged at his lips. Since when do you care what they say? Besides, I think they'd say you were doing a Christian kindness, taking in an orphan. Zara stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the land they had cultivated together, land that could now nurture a child as well as crops. When can I meet them? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The introduction took place the next day. Sarah Winters was a pale shadow of a woman, her once beautiful face gaunt with illness, but her eyes lit up with hope when she saw Zara. Mrs. Zimmer, she greeted, her voice weak but determined. Your husband told me about you, about your kindness. Please, call me Zara, she replied, sitting beside Sarah on the hotel bed. Little Emma hid behind her mother at first, peering at Zara with solemn brown eyes beneath a mop of curly black hair. But children have an instinct for genuine hearts. And before long, she had crawled into Zara's lap to show her a rag doll named Betsy. As Zara helped the child smooth Betsy's yarn hair, she felt something unlock inside her chest, a chamber of her heart that had been sealed shut for too long. She likes you, Sarah observed, hope and grief mingling in her voice. She doesn't take to many people so quickly. She's beautiful, Zara said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Perfect. Over the next few weeks, Zara spent every day with Sarah and Emma, learning the child's routines, her favorite songs, the way she liked her bread, cut into triangles instead of squares. Sarah shared stories of Emma's babyhood, ensuring that Zara would be able to keep these memories alive for her daughter. When Sarah grew too weak to care for Emma alone, Zara brought them both to the homestead. Garrett built a small bed for Emma next to theirs, and they settled into a new routine as Sarah's strength ebbed day by day. One evening, as Garrett read Emma a bedtime story on the porch swing, Sarah beckoned Zara to her bedside. I need to know, she whispered, her breath labored. Will you love her as your own? Even on the days when she reminds you of me? Of what you didn't choose? Zara took Sarah's frail hand between hers. I already do love her, and I will tell her about you every day, about your courage and your love for her. Tears slipped down Sarah's hollow cheeks. Thank you for giving my child what I cannot a future. Sarah Winters passed peacefully in her sleep 3 nights later. They buried her beneath a cottonwood tree on the homestead, and Zara held Emma as the child placed wildflowers on her mother's grave. Mama's with the angels now? Emma asked, looking up at Zara with trust that nearly broke her heart. Yes, sweetheart, Zara replied, stroking the child's curls. And she can see you from heaven. She'll always be watching over you. Emma considered this, her small face serious. Can I call you Mama too? So I have a mama here and a mama in heaven? Zara felt Garrett's supportive hand on her shoulder as tears threatened to overwhelm her. If you'd like to, yes, I would be honored. Emma nodded, decision made with the simple clarity of childhood. And him? She pointed to Garrett. You can call me Pa, Garrett said, kneeling beside them. If that feels right to you. Emma reached out one small hand to each of them. Mama and Pa, she declared. My new Mama and Pa. 2 months later, Zara rode into Copper Creek with Emma seated before her on the saddle and Garrett beside them. It was the child's first visit to town since coming to live with them, and Zara felt a familiar anxiety as they approached the main street. But the whispers that followed them now were different. Look at how that child adores her, Zara heard Mrs. Parker say to Eliza Thornton as they passed. She was meant to be a mother after all. Some things are meant to be, Eliza agreed. The Lord works in mysterious ways. As they stopped in front of the general store, several women approached to coo over Emma, who basked in the attention with childish delight. She has your smile, Virginia Bowman declared, though the child bore no physical resemblance to either Zara or Garrett. Zara opened her mouth to correct the misconception, but Garrett caught her eye and shook his head slightly. Let them think what they wanted. Emma was their daughter now, in all the ways that mattered. That evening, as they rode home with Emma drowsy against Zara's chest, Garrett reached over to touch her cheek. "Happy?" he asked, the word encompassing so much more than a simple question. Zara looked down at the child in her arms, then up at the man who had changed her world, and finally out at the homestead, appearing on the horizon, their home, their future. "Yes," she said, the word full and rich with meaning. "I am." As they approached the cabin, golden in the light of the setting sun, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from loneliness to love, from mockery to respect, from emptiness to fulfillment. She had ridden beside a cowboy into town and made the whispers die in the dust, but more importantly, she had discovered that family wasn't defined by blood or ability to conceive. It was built through love, choice, and the courage to open one's heart after it had been broken. Emma stirred against her, mumbling sleepily, "Home, Mama." "Yes, sweetheart," Zara replied, her voice steady with certainty. "We're home." And they were, all three of them, together. In the years that followed, the Zimmer homestead flourished. Garrett's horse-breeding business expanded, bringing prosperity and respect. Zara started a small school on their property for the children of neighboring ranches, finding joy in teaching that she had never imagined. Emma grew into a spirited young girl with her mother's curls and a confidence born of being deeply loved. On her 7th birthday, she asked about having brothers or sisters, and Zara and Garrett exchanged a look that held both pain and possibility. 2 months later, they took in twin boys whose parents had died in a flash flood. The following year, they fostered a teenage girl whose father had abandoned her. By the time Emma was 12, the Zimmer homestead housed 7 children of various ages and backgrounds, each one cherished as if born to them. The whispers in Copper Creek changed completely over time. Now, when Zara rode into town, she heard things like, "There goes the woman with the biggest heart in the territory," and "The Zimmers have done more good than the church and the school combined." Sometimes at night, when all the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Zara would stand on the porch and look up at the stars, remembering the lonely woman she had once been, the woman mocked for barren years, the woman who had believed herself somehow less. And then Garrett would join her, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her head. "What are you thinking about?" he would ask. "About how empty can become full," she would reply. "About how endings can become beginnings." And together they would look out over their land, their home, their family, none of it created in the conventional way, all of it more precious for having been chosen. In a harsh land where only the strongest survived, they had built something beautiful, something lasting, something that would echo through generations, not through bloodlines, but through lives touched and hearts healed. And for Zara Reed Zimmer, once mocked and marginalized for her barrenness, that legacy was more than enough. It was everything.